cabin door creaked open. Caleb Thornton stepped inside, expecting darkness and silence. What he found made his hand drop to the Colt 45 on his hip. A shadow moved on his bed. He drew the pistol in one fluid motion, the hammer clicking back with a sound that echoed through the small room. The dying embers in the fireplace cast just enough light to reveal a figure huddled beneath his thin blanket. A woman, young, hair black as midnight, spilling across his pillow. Her clothes hung in tatters, barely covering her body. Patches of red frozen skin showed through the ripped fabric. She clutched the sheet to her chest like it was the only barrier between herself and death. Caleb kept the gun raised. His gaze swept every corner of the cabin, checking for threats, for ambush. A lifetime of Army scouting had taught him that nothing was ever as simple as it appeared. The woman's voice came out as a whisper, broken, desperate. "This is a sacred ritual of my people, the Apache. A woman in danger may enter a stranger's sleeping place to seek protection." She trembled as she spoke, not from cold alone. Her eyes kept darting toward the door behind him, as if expecting someone to burst through at any moment. Caleb studied her face. Early 20s, mixed blood, Apache and Mexican if he had to guess. Beautiful, but that beauty was buried beneath exhaustion and terror. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks hollow. She had been running hard, running long. He knew about the Apache custom she mentioned. He had heard the old scouts speak of it around campfires years ago. A desperate tradition. A last resort for women fleeing violence. But the panic in her expression told him something else entirely. This was not ceremony. This was survival dressed in borrowed words. Caleb lowered the Colt slowly. He did not holster it, not yet. Instead, he reached for the heavy wool blanket folded at the foot of the bed and tossed it gently toward her. "You are freezing," he said. His voice was low, steady, the voice of a man who had learned to speak softly in dangerous places. "Warmth matters more than explanations right now." She flinched when the blanket landed near her. Then she grabbed it with trembling fingers and pulled it tight around her shoulders. Her breathing came in short, ragged bursts, like a wounded animal uncertain whether the hand reaching toward it meant help or harm. Caleb walked to the fireplace. He added 2 logs to the dying embers and watched the flames slowly climb. Then he pulled his wooden chair close to the fire, sat down with his back to her, and stared into the growing blaze. He could feel her watching him, waiting, expecting him to turn around, to demand something, to become the monster she clearly feared he would be. He did none of those things. The night stretched on in silence. Wind howled outside, rattling the shutters hard enough to shake dust from the rafters. She startled at the sound, her breath catching sharp in her throat. "Just the wind," Caleb said without turning. "Nothing more." His voice seemed to anchor her. The desperate tension in her shoulders began to ease. Her breathing slowed from panicked
This is a sacred ritual of my people, but I seek protection.
You're freezing. Warmth matters more than explanations.
gasps to something resembling rest. Caleb Thornton was 42 years old. He had lived alone in this cabin for nearly a decade. Before that, he had been one of the best scouts in the United States Cavalry. He could read tracks on bare rock. He could smell a campfire from 3 miles distant. He could shoot the eye out of a rattlesnake at 50 yards without thinking twice. But in 1877, he had made a mistake that haunted every night since. He had misread the signs, led a cavalry unit to what he believed was a hostile Comanche war camp. It was not. It was a village of women, children, and old men. The soldiers opened fire before anyone could stop them. 4 children died that day, 3 women, 4 elders, 11 innocent souls extinguished because Caleb Thornton had followed the wrong tracks. He resigned his commission the next morning, rode west until the land ran out of people, built this cabin with his own hands in the shadow of the Davis Mountains. and swore he would never put another life at risk again. The best way to protect people, he had decided long ago, was to stay away from them entirely. Until tonight. When dawn broke gray and cold, the woman was still alive, still wrapped in his blankets, still watching him with those wary, measuring eyes. Caleb rose from the chair, his back stiff from the long night. He poured warm water from the kettle into a tin cup and set it on the table near the bed. Then he placed a piece of cornbread beside it. "Drink," he said. "Eat. Questions can wait." She hesitated. Her hand reached out slowly, as if expecting him to snatch the cup away. When he made no move toward her, she took a small sip, then another. Faint color began returning to her hollow cheeks. "My name is Nayeli," she whispered. Caleb nodded once. "Rest, Nayeli. You are safe under this roof." He pulled on his coat and stepped outside into the bitter morning cold. The sky hung low and gray, promising more snow before nightfall. White covered everything, turning the world into an empty page waiting to be written upon. He walked the perimeter of his property with the automatic vigilance of a man who had spent years reading landscapes for danger, checked the fence line, fed the horse in the small lean-to behind the cabin, broke the ice forming on the water trough, and then he noticed something that made his gut clench tight. Tracks. 2 horses, moving parallel to his land about 3 miles east, the hoof prints pressed fresh into yesterday's snow. Someone was searching this area, methodically, patiently. Caleb crouched down and studied the marks with practiced eyes. The horses were shod with iron. Not Apache ponies. These belonged to white men, cowboys probably, or hired guns looking for something specific. He filed the information away like ammunition and returned to the cabin without mentioning what he had found. That evening, after Nayeli had fallen into exhausted sleep, Caleb took the Winchester 1873 down from the wall. His hands remembered the weight even after all this time. He cleaned the barrel with an oiled rag, worked the lever action until it moved smooth as water, counted the rounds in the magazine. 14 bullets. The old instincts were stirring now. Skills he had buried deep were clawing their way back to the surface. But as he worked the rifle, one question burned through his mind like a brand.
The ritual, it was a lie. I needed a reason to survive.
I figured there was more to your story.
When the moment came, could he pull the trigger, or would he freeze again? Stand paralyzed while people died around him, just like that terrible morning when the shooting started and he could not move, could not think, could not do anything but watch? 3 days passed in quiet rhythm. Nayeli grew stronger with each sunrise. She began moving around the cabin, helping with small tasks that needed doing. Sweeping ash from the hearth, stirring the pot of beans on the stove, mending a tear in one of his worn shirts with neat, precise stitches that spoke of practice. She did not speak much, neither did he, but the silence between them began to feel less like distance and more like understanding. 2 people learning each other's presence without the need for constant words. On the 4th day, she told him the truth. They sat at his small table, tin cups of coffee warming their hands when she spoke. "The ritual I mentioned that first night." She stared at the dark liquid, unable to meet his gaze. "It was a lie. I needed a reason for you to let me stay. I am sorry." Caleb set down his cup. "I figured there was more to your story." Nayeli's voice trembled as she continued, but she forced the words out like poison that needed draining from a wound. "I was bought by a family called Holloway, cattle ranchers in the Cimarron Valley. They paid silver for me at the border, treated me like property, like livestock." She paused, her fingers curled into fists against the rough wood of the table. "The oldest son, Darius, he wanted me as his wife, but he did not want a wife. He wanted something to own, to break. When I fought back, when I bit his hand hard enough to draw blood, he beat me until my ribs cracked. Then he locked me in the horse stable for 3 days, said he would teach me to behave, said he would tame me like a wild Mustang. Caleb's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. He knew the Holloway name. Everyone in this part of Texas knew it. Old Josiah Holloway had died the previous winter, leaving his cattle empire to 3 sons. Darius, the eldest, known for his cruelty and quick temper. Emmett, the middle brother, fastest gun in the valley, according to those who had seen him draw. And Silas, the youngest, a tracker who could follow a ghost across bare stone. Dangerous men, all 3 of them. "How far is Cimarron Valley?" Caleb asked, keeping his voice level. 3 days by horse, maybe 4 in this weather. He nodded slowly. The mathematics told a grim story. She had been running for 5 days when she reached his cabin. The men tracking her would have needed time to organize, to pick up her trail through the frozen mountains. They were coming. The only question was when. "If you want me to leave," Niley said quietly, raising her chin despite the fear in her eyes, "I will go. I do not want to bring violence to your door." Caleb looked at her for a long moment. The bruises on her ribs still showed yellow and purple when she moved wrong. Her hands remained raw from frostbite. She had survived things that would have broken most people, yet here she sat, offering to walk back into the frozen wilderness rather than endanger a stranger. "You did not bring violence here," he said finally. "Violence comes from men who cannot accept that a woman has the right to choose her own path." The relief that flooded her face was not mere gratitude. It was something deeper, the rare and precious feeling of being believed without question, without doubt, without demand for proof. On the 5th morning, Silas Holloway came. Caleb was splitting firewood behind the cabin when he heard hoofbeats approaching. Slow, deliberate, the measured pace of a man who knew exactly what he was hunting. A single rider emerged from the tree line at the edge of the property, tall and broad across the shoulders, sitting.
He knows, doesn't he?
Yes. We prepare.
His horse with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. A thick scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, white against weather-darkened skin. Silas reined his mount to a stop 30 yards from the cabin. He did not dismount, just sat there surveying the property with cold, patient eyes that missed nothing. "Looking for someone?" Caleb called out. His hand rested on the handle of the splitting axe, but his Colt sat within easy reach on the chopping block. "Lost property," Silas replied. His voice carried flat across the frozen air, empty of emotion. "Half-breed girl, black hair hanging past her shoulders. Early 20s, maybe younger. You seen anything like that?" "I live alone. Have for years now." Silas's gaze drifted to the clothesline strung near the well. A woman's torn dress hung there, stiff with frost where it had been left to dry. His thin lips curled into something that might have been a smile on a different face. "Tracks lead in this direction," he said. "Interesting tracks, small feet, running hard." He gathered his reins, preparing to turn his horse. "We will be back, friend, with more men, more questions." He rode away without waiting for a response, disappearing into the gray morning mist between the pines. Caleb watched until the sound of hoofbeats faded entirely. Then he walked inside and found Nayeli standing rigid at the window, her face pale as the snow outside. "He knows," she said. "Not a question." "Yes." "What do we do now?" Caleb crossed to the wall where the Winchester hung. He lifted it down, feeling the familiar weight settle into his hands like an old friend he had tried to forget. "We prepare." The 6th day was spent making ready for what was coming. Caleb taught Niley how to handle the Colt single-action army. The revolver looked large in her slim hands, but she held it steady, without trembling. She learned the mechanics quickly, how to thumb back the hammer, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger rather than yanking it. Her father had been a hunter before the sickness took him, she explained. He had taught her to shoot when she was barely tall enough to hold a rifle. Those lessons had never entirely left her. By afternoon, she could put 3 rounds into a fence post at 20 yards. Tight grouping, consistent aim. You handle that weapon well, Caleb observed. I learned to shoot for survival, she answered, not for sport. That evening, as firelight painted dancing shadows on the cabin walls, Nayeli asked the question he had been dreading. Why do you live out here alone? A man with your skills could work anywhere, could have a family. A life among people. Caleb stared into the flames for a long time before answering. When he spoke, his voice came out rough, scraped raw by memories he had tried to bury. He told her about the cavalry raid, about the misread signs that sent soldiers charging into a peaceful village, about the gunfire that erupted before dawn and did not stop until 11 people lay dead in the dirt. 4 of them were children, he said, playing in the morning light one moment, gone the next, because I followed the wrong trail, because I was so certain I was right that I never stopped to question. He fell silent. The fire crackled and popped, filling the space where words should have been. Since that day, I have not pointed a weapon at another human being. Not once in all these years. He looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused from labor.
May I stay? Because I choose to?
Stay. We'll build something new here. Together.
When the Holloways come, I do not know if I can do what needs doing. I might freeze. I might fail you the same way I failed those people. Niley was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice held no pity, only truth. You clean that rifle every night after I fall asleep. I have heard you. You check the ammunition. You watch the ridge each morning before dawn. You have been preparing for this fight since the moment I arrived. She met his gaze with steady certainty. You are ready, Caleb. You simply have not allowed yourself to believe it yet. Dawn of the 7th day arrived wrapped in fog. Caleb woke to the sound he had been dreading. Hoofbeats, not one horse this time, many. Approaching from the east, where the trail wound down from the high country. He moved to the window and counted shadows materializing through the mist. 5 riders. Darius Holloway rode at the front, mounted on a black stallion that stamped and snorted in the cold air. Behind him came Emmett and Silas, flanked by 2 hired guns Caleb did not recognize. Hard-looking men with the dead eyes of those who kill for wages. Nayeli, he kept his voice low and calm, despite the tension coiling in his chest. Take position at the east window. Stay low. Do not fire until I give the signal or until you have no other choice. She picked up the Colt without hesitation. The fear that had haunted her for days was gone now, replaced by something harder. Something forged in the fire of too much suffering. I am not hiding this time, she said. Caleb checked the Winchester one final time. 14 rounds in the magazine. He chambered the first one with a smooth motion and stepped out onto the porch. Darius Holloway reined his stallion to a halt 40 yards from the cabin. His expensive coat was spotted with trail mud, his face twisted with the particular fury of a man accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. Thornton! He bellowed across the frozen ground. I know that half-breed is hiding in there. Send her out and we ride away peaceful. Keep playing games and we burn this rat hole to ash with both of you inside. Caleb stood motionless on the porch, the Winchester held loose at his side. His voice carried clear and cold through the morning air. She is not property, Holloway. She is a free woman who made her choice. That choice was to leave. You would be wise to respect it. Darius laughed, a harsh, ugly sound like rocks grinding together. Free? I paid good silver for that girl at the border. Legal transaction, witnessed and recorded. She belongs to me, same as my horses, same as my cattle. You cannot buy human beings. Not anymore. Not in this country. Emmett swung down from his saddle, landing light on his feet despite his size. His hand hovered near the polished grip of his pistol, fingers flexing with anticipation. "You have 10 seconds to walk away, old man. Whatever she told you, whatever lies she whispered to get you protecting her, none of it matters. This is Holloway business, not yours." Caleb did not move, did not flinch, did not blink. "Your 10 seconds are wasted. The lady stays." Emmett's hand dropped toward his gun. Caleb fired first. The Winchester roared, shattering the morning silence. The bullet caught Emmett in the right shoulder before his pistol cleared leather, spinning him sideways and dropping him hard to the frozen ground. His weapon flew from nerveless fingers and landed in the mud 3 feet away. All those years of not shooting at men, all those nights wondering if he could still do it when the moment came. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget. Chaos erupted across the yard. The two hired guns drew their weapons simultaneously, spreading apart to divide his fire. Caleb dove behind the thick porch railing, working the Winchester's lever as bullets splintered wood inches from his head. He rose just enough to aim and squeeze the trigger. The first hired gun jerked backward in his saddle as the round punched through his chest. He tumbled from his horse and did not move again. The second gunman had swung his aim toward the cabin window, where he spotted movement behind the glass. A shot cracked from inside the cabin. Nailey's bullet took the man in the shoulder. He screamed, his pistol discharging harmlessly into the dirt as he fell from his horse, clutching the wound. She had not killed him, but she had ended his part in this fight. Silas Holloway was moving. The tracker had dismounted during the first exchange of gunfire and was circling toward the back of the cabin, using the confusion as cover. But Caleb had spent 15 years reading movement, tracking sound, anticipating where prey would go before it arrived. He heard the crunch of boots on frozen snow, calculated the angle, slipped around the corner of the building with the Winchester raised. Silas came around the back wall at a dead run, pistol leading. Caleb swung the rifle stock in a tight arc that connected with the tracker's temple. Bone met wood with a crack that echoed off the cabin walls. Silas dropped without a sound, his pistol skittering across the ice. 4 men down, 1 remained. Darius Holloway had dismounted during the chaos. Now he crouched behind the stone water trough, his pistol trained on the cabin door, his eyes wild with fury and the first flickering shadows of fear. "Thornton!" His voice cracked on the name. "I will see you hang for this. I will burn everything you own. I will stand up." Caleb stepped into the open, Winchester leveled at the trough. "Face this like a man instead of a coward hiding behind rocks." Slowly, Darius rose to his feet. His expensive clothes were splattered with mud and worse. His hand shook where it gripped the pistol. Though whether from cold or terror, Caleb could not tell. "Who are you?" Darius demanded. "What kind of saddle tramp takes on 5 armed men over some half-breed whore?" "Cavalry scout, 15 years tracking hostiles and putting down wolves that threatened the herd." Caleb's voice dropped lower, harder. "You are the wolf here, Holloway, and this is my territory." Darius glanced around at the destruction of his little army. His brother Emmett lay moaning in the dirt, clutching his bleeding shoulder. Silas sprawled unconscious behind the cabin. The 2 hired guns were finished, 1 dead and 1 wounded beyond fighting. 5 men had come to drag 1 woman back to hell. None of them were walking away victorious. Something shifted behind Darius's eyes. The calculation of a bully realizing he had finally encountered someone who would not back down. His pistol barrel swung away from Caleb, tracking toward the cabin window, toward Nayeli. "If I cannot have her," he snarled, "then nobody—" Caleb fired. The bullet shattered Darius Holloway's right wrist. The pistol spun away through the air as he collapsed, screaming into the frozen mud, blood spraying across the white ground in patterns like scattered roses. Caleb walked forward without hurry. He kicked the fallen pistol well out of reach and stood over the man who had beaten Nayeli, who had locked her in a stable like an animal, who had ridden 3 days through mountain snow to reclaim what he considered his property. "You're fortunate," Caleb said quietly. "A decade ago, I would have aimed for your heart." Darius could only whimper in response, cradling his ruined wrist against his chest. An hour later, the Holloway brothers were bound and loaded onto their horses. Emmett, his shoulder bandaged with strips torn from his own shirt, would have to lead the group back to civilization. It was either that or bleed out on the frozen trail. Caleb stood before them, the Winchester resting easy in the crook of his arm. "You will ride to town," he said. "You will tell the sheriff exactly what happened here. Every detail. How you came with 5 armed men to take a woman against her will. How you threatened to burn down a man's home. How you got exactly what you deserved." Emmett nodded once, his face gray with pain and shock. "And understand this clearly." Caleb's voice hardened to iron. "If any Holloway sets foot on my land again, if I hear even a whisper that you are looking for this woman, I will not aim for shoulders and wrists. I will put you in the ground where you stand. Not if you understand." Emmett nodded again. The defeated riders turned their horses east and began the long, painful journey home. Caleb watched until they disappeared into the tree line, until the sound of hoofbeats faded to nothing, until only the wind remained. Then he went inside. That afternoon, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Nayeli stood at the cabin window, watching golden light spill across the valley, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of amber and rose. Her hands no longer trembled. Her shoulders no longer hunched against expected blows. Caleb joined her at the window. For a long moment, neither spoke. There was no need. The violence was finished. The threat had passed. What remained was something quieter, something worth protecting. "You fired," Nayeli said finally, "after all those years of doubt. All those years of believing you could not." "I found something worth fighting for." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Something that gave the skills meaning again. Purpose instead of pain." She turned to face him fully. The woman who had crawled into his cabin, half frozen and desperate, now stood straight and steady. The woman who had picked up a gun and fought beside him without flinching. She was not merely a survivor anymore. She was a warrior in her own right. "May I stay?" she asked. "Not because I am afraid, not because I have nowhere else to go, because I want to be here, with you." Caleb looked at her, really looked, saw past the surface to the iron beneath. This woman had endured horrors that would have destroyed weaker souls, had crossed frozen mountains alone, had stood at that window and fired when the bullets started flying. She deserved more than shelter. She deserved a home. "Stay," he said. "We will build something new here, together." 3 months later, spring came to the hill country. The snows melted, revealing rich, dark earth beneath. Wildflowers bloomed along the creek that ran behind the cabin, painting the meadow in yellow and purple and white. The air smelled of new grass and warming soil and the promise of growing things. Nayeli and Caleb worked side by side in the expanded garden they had planted together. Their movements had fallen into easy rhythm over the passing weeks, anticipating each other without need for words. 2 people who had learned to trust through action rather than promises. A letter had come from town 2 weeks prior, delivered by a traveling preacher who looked surprised to find anyone living this far from civilization. The sheriff had investigated the Holloway ranch after the brothers returned, beaten and bloodied. He found evidence of the border traders who had sold Nayeli and 3 other women, found records of payments, found chains in the stable where she had been imprisoned. Darius Holloway awaited trial for his crimes. The cattle empire their father had built was crumbling under the weight of scandal and legal fees. Neither Emmett nor Silas had been seen in the territory since that morning when they rode away defeated. The threat was finished. Truly finished this time. Caleb paused in his work, leaning on the hoe to catch his breath. His gaze traveled across the land he had hidden in for so long, the cabin that had been his prison as much as his refuge, the mountains that had sheltered him from the world he was too afraid to face. It looked different now, not like isolation, like home. Niley straightened beside him, wiping dirt from her hands onto her apron. She had filled out over the weeks, her cheeks round and healthy, her eyes bright with contentment he had not seen in them before. The Winchester still hung on the wall inside the cabin, not as a reminder of violence or fear, but as a symbol of readiness, the willingness to protect what mattered. Caleb had carried guilt for a decade, believed his hands too blood-stained to ever hold anything precious. Believed he deserved nothing but solitude and silence. Niley had shown him otherwise, not through words but through her presence, her strength, her refusal to let the darkness define her future. She had taught him that the past did not have to be a prison, that mistakes, even terrible ones, did not erase the possibility of redemption. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that set the mountains ablaze with color, Nayeli moved closer to him. Her hand found his, their fingers interlacing with the natural ease of people who had fought together, bled together, chosen each other. "We are home now," she said softly. Caleb looked at the woman beside him, the garden they had planted, the cabin that no longer felt empty. The future stretching out before them like a trail through untouched country. For the first time in 10 long years, he smiled. "Yes," he answered, "we are." The evening settled around them soft as a blessing. Two people who had walked through fire and found each other on the other side. Two souls who had been running from different horrors and discovered that the running could finally stop. Not because the world had become safe, but because they had become strong enough to face it together. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to join us for more tales of courage, redemption, and the untamed spirit of the Old West.
The story leaves a profound lesson about responsibility, redemption, and the power of making the right choices in crucial moments. Caleb is not a perfect hero. He carries a lasting emotional wound from a past mistake, a mistake that claimed the lives of innocent people. Remarkably, he doesn't escape his guilt by justifying or blaming circumstances, but chooses self-exile, living in solitude to avoid endangering anyone else. However, the story shows that avoidance isn't always the way to atone, and true redemption only comes when a person dares to confront their greatest fears. The appearance of the woman forces Caleb to face a choice he had previously avoided: intervene or turn his back. She is not only someone in need of protection, but also a reflection of pain, injustice, and the yearning for freedom. Through this, the story affirms a powerful message. Protecting the vulnerable is not an act of heroism, but a fundamental moral responsibility of humanity. When Caleb chose to stand by her, he not only protected a life, but also restored the human value he thought he had lost. The second lesson lies in the power of choice. The woman did not ask to stay out of fear, but because she proactively chose a new life, a place where she would be respected. This choice shows that freedom does not come from being saved, but from being recognized for her right to decide her own destiny. At the same time, Caleb also chose to trust himself again, believing that he could still do the right thing despite his past mistakes. Finally, the story emphasizes that healing does not come from forgetting the past, but from transforming it into a foundation for better actions in the present. When two wounded individuals find each other, they don't erase the darkness of the past, but learn to move forward together. That is the deepest meaning of hope and salvation.